Hi, everybody. This is Brooke Arnold. I'm one of the puppies here at the Dogington Post. Thanks for joining us. I want to welcome you to Dogington University, brought to you by the Dogington Post and Merrick Pet Care, a leader in the real pet food revolution. Is your dog's food worthy of a fork? Merrick recipes are made with the best quality meat as the first ingredient and only the freshest produce for health you can see in your dog's bowl and, more importantly, in your dog. Visit Merrick Pet Care on Facebook to join the real food revolution. Today we're excited to present some educational power to the paw with Dr. Ian Dunbar. So Ian Dunbar is one of the most well-respected dog trainers in the industry. He's an animal behaviorist and a veterinarian. He was the creator of the world's first off-leash puppy classes and the founder of the Association of Pet Dog Trainers. Now, everybody, make sure you stick around for the full hour, not only to hear every bit of information from Dr. Dunbar, but because we have a little giveaway at the end of the hour, and you'll have your own opportunity to ask him your toughest training questions. So everybody grab a pen and paper, get ready to learn your training tips from one of the very best in the business. Dr. Dunbar, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Brooke. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm probably the only non-tech person here. I'm just working on a telephone, looking out over my garden. Anyway, cut to the chase. That's a pretty wide open topic I've got, owner and dog-friendly training. So I thought what I would do is hit a number of sort of eclectic points where I think maybe some trainers and certainly owners are having difficulty and what we can do to make things better. We'll say a little bit about temperament problems, socialization, very little bit about behavior problems. I'll only focus on barking. Then we'll look at different reward-based training techniques we have available to us, and especially looking at a few sort of new innovations, which I think is the direction we should be going in. Anyway, to start with, socialization. This is how I got into this field years and years and years ago. I was doing a special honors degree when I was at the Royal Veterinary College, and you had 1 week to research your own topic. And I had happened across an article by Michael Fox about socialization, and so I researched that for a week, and I found it very fascinating, and that's actually the reason why I ended up coming to Berkeley to join the PhD program there. I've been, I guess, working on this now for 40 years, trying to spread the word as much as I can. The people still don't understand socialization. I mean, it drives me crazy. Sometimes I feel like banging my head against a brick wall. All the way down from breeders to veterinarians, owners, they just don't get it. I guess the whole breeding thing, we go back to the nature-nurture controversy. You know, what's more important in terms of dog behavior and temperament? Nature, the dog's genes, genetic inheritance, or nurture, socialization and training. There has always been a sort of transatlantic bias on this, with everyone in Europe thinking, you know, we breed good dogs, that genes are all important. And then this side of the Atlantic in the States, greater emphasis on nurture and how socialization and training affects the development of behavior. Breeders, though, of course, are very, very biased towards genes. They still believe you breed a good dog. And sadly, this is what the general public thinks. The general public thinks all you have to do is to go out and purchase a purebred puppy, and it will be wonderful. What we forget there is what happened in the process of domestication. When we domesticated several species, they do not automatically grow up to be good dogs. If you don't mind if I use the words good and bad, it's kind of everyone knows what I mean. What was domesticated, or what was selectively bred for in the process of domestication, was the ease for socialization and training. However, we still have to do it, and this is what is simply not being done. I call this the great insanity. We're not even doing, I think, 1% of the socialization and early handling and gentling that we could. And I think dog owners really get royally screwed here. They get a puppy at 8 weeks, and already this puppy is so far behind. Of course, no one sees the problem because it's a puppy, and they say, oh, he's totally friendly. Look, he's Mr. Sociable with people, and he's Mr. Sociable with other dogs. Yep, and so he should be. He's a puppy. but the damage has been done. However, the fears will not develop until later in life, starting 5.5, 6, 7, 8 months of age. And then predictably, the dog becomes a little wary of people, a little standoffish, especially to strangers, men, children. And this then develops into full-blown shyness, fearfulness, reactivity, and aggression. So all this is kind of pre-programmed by the lack of socialization early on. But I think no one sees the problem, and they don't understand the purpose of socialization because they don't see what it does. You have to wait until you have a 6-month-old dog that hasn't had all this socialization to see the problems developing, and these are huge problems, which I think destroy the quality of life for dogs and many, many owners. It's just horrible having a dog that's fearful, let alone one that's reactive and aggressive. This I find extremely sad, ironic, because it is so easy to produce a bomb-proof dog, a dog which is bomb-proof to people. I mean, I'll be the first to admit that raising a dog to be dog-dog friendly to all dogs can be a little tricky, especially if you have a boy dog, especially if you have his ghoulies on. And you've got your work cut out there doing a lot of classical conditioning all through later puppyhood, adolescence, and way up until he's 3 years old. And then you can walk your dog. Like, yesterday I was walking in the park with Hugo and Zuzu and just thinking how wonderful it is because both the dogs are friendly. So I can enjoy the sunshine and the view of San Francisco Bay and the bridge. But without that, life becomes a nightmare. For people, they have to put the dog away. When people come around to the house, they can't take the dog on walks. They have to be very careful on walks, off leash or on leash, if other dogs come up, and so on and so on. So let's just concentrate for a little while on making dogs friendly to people. What needs to be done? Well, oodles of handling neonatally before 3 weeks of age. This is really where you make the bomb-proof dog. He can't hear too well, he can't see too well, but he can smell, so he knows these people are strangers, and he can feel. And this, of course, is all about handling. If you don't have a dog that you can cuddle, what is the point? It's like having a spouse you can't touch. I mean, there's no point to it. So we want to make sure the dog is handleable. And when we look at the subliminal bite triggers, all these triggers which add up, and eventually when you've got 4 of them occurring at once, we get a bite. Most of them have to do with touching the dog's body somewhere. I mean, certainly we have the person who's involved in the bite. If they're a stranger, a man or a child, it's more likely to be a trigger. We have valued objects like bones and the food bowl, but the rest of them are all to do with the dog's body. His 2 ears, his 4 paws, opening his muzzle, fiddling with his ghoulies or rear end, giving him a hug, staring in his eyes, going kissy face. And the biggest subliminal trigger of all is just reaching for the dog's collar. And I think this is where we need to step back. And it doesn't take the brains of Einstein to work this one out. A person reaches for the dog's collar, and the dog ducks his head. He's scared of the human hand. Why? Could be that the human hand has done some bad things, that the dog was playing in the park, and they grab his collar, put him on leash, play session over. Or they're going to leave, so they grab the dog's collar and put him in confinement while they're away all day long. Or they've grabbed the dog and said, "You bad dog." Obviously now the dog becomes predictably wary of people reaching for his collar. So we want to defuse all these things very early on. Neonatal handling, loads and loads of people. It's so easy to handle these dogs when they're neonates. The very concept of it being dangerous is ridiculous. So we invite loads of people to the kennel. They just sit, they pass the puppy, and they play with his little ears and his little paws and his ghoulies and hug him and go kissy face and all that stuff. And then when the puppy's 3 weeks old, 4 weeks old, more people come around. I always say in my books and on my websites, 100 people before 8 weeks of age, and then another 100 people between 8 and 12 weeks. The so-called critical period of socialization ends at 12 weeks. When people get a puppy, say at 8 weeks from a breeder, it's actually a lucky puppy if he's seen more than 2 people, the breeder and their friend. This is just, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. I just don't get it. We then need to be alert to the warning signs. We can usually pick these up between 8 weeks and 3 months of age. Little warning signs that this dog is going to bite. He's going to snap when he gets older at about 6 months. Little things like he's ducking his head, he's backing off, he's got slow recalls, he pulls his paw away when you grab hold of it, and stuff like this. Let's recognize it, these incipient signs that we're going in the wrong direction, we're going downhill, and let's resolve it. So that's the first thing. We must socialize, and we must tell owners that the puppies must be socialized. Otherwise, they're buying a lemon. And it won't be a dog that they can have enjoyment with, and it won't be a dog that enjoys his life. I mean, I want you to think of all the things that scare you or make you anxious. You know, is it creepy crawlers? Is it snakes or rats or spiders, cockroaches? Is it dark places? Is it heights? Is it speaking in public? You know, like what is it that makes you anxious? Well, for dogs which aren't socialized properly prior to 8 weeks of age, it's fear and anxiety of people, yet they are faced to force this fear every day of their lives. They are hurting, it just ain't fair, and we got to do something about it. Moving on to the next topic, very briefly, preventing behavior problems. You know, it is no surprise the problems that dogs develop. They soil the house, they bark excessively, they destructively chew, they dig holes in the garden, and so on and so on and so on. You know, it cracks me up when people come to me and say, oh, I got a problem with my dog. And I say, what's that? And they say, oh, he barks. I think, no, you're kidding me. Oh, good Lord, a dog that barks. I mean, yeah, we'd be surprised if the dog sort of went, or bark, but when he barks, wouldn't we have expected this and done something about it during his development? So basically, long-term, short-term confinement, all of this stuff is in my books, which you can download for free from dogstardaily.com, so I won't go into it too much. Basically, when the owner's away from home, confine the dog to a long-term confinement area, and the same advice applies to whether you've got a puppy coming into the home or you've adopted an adult dog for the shelter. We did the same for Claude that we adopted, as we did for little Hugo when we got him at 6 weeks. The long-term confinement area wants to be long and thin, 3 times as long as it's wide, a bed at one end, a toilet at the other. It needs a water supply and hollow chew toys stuffed with food. No food bowls. Feed the dog only from hollow chew toys. What's the purpose of long-term confinement? It prevents mistakes around the house so that house training and chew toy training can be errorless. It auto-shapes the dog or sets up the situation so the dog will train itself to use its toilet area because they have 3 very strong preferences in terms of urination and defecation. They want to do it as far as possible from their sleeping area. They have a spatial preference. They have an olfactory preference. They want to pee where there's pee but not where there's feces. So leave the urine there and clean up the feces every day. And they have a substrate preference. They want to pee as adults on the substrate or the ground that they peed on when they were young. So it's a disaster for the puppy to have one mistake and pee on a carpet. Otherwise, he will think this is the best invention in doggy toilets, you know, ever. Because, you know, it soaks up the urine, you don't get your feet wet. So the substrate preference, it's a good idea to have the final substrate as the puppy toilet or the long-term confinement area toilet. I usually use a roll of turf, but it can be dirt. I guess if you live in Minnesota, it can be snow and ice. If you live in Manhattan, I would suggest a concrete slab because the puppies really get used to what's underfoot where they peed as a puppy. We feed them only from chew toys, and the stuffing the chew toys with food, there are 4 great ones for this. The regular old Kong is good for stuffing with moistened kibble, and then you put it in the freezer overnight to make Kongsicles. The Premier Squirrel Dude is good for stuffing with dry kibble, and the Kong Biscuit Ball is great for stuffing with any kind of raw diet, and again, freezing it. You want to stuff it so we have a slow food delivery, that's all, and then the dog will train himself. What you will find is very soon the dog will be lying down, and every little bit of food that comes out rewards the dog for lying down, chewing the chew toy, and for not barking. So we're entraining the puppy to be quiet and calm from the onset. This, of course, is providing the puppy with a hobby, so he probably won't develop separation anxiety when left at home alone. When the owners are at home, So long-term confinement area to prevent mistakes around the house, to auto-shape the dog to use his toilet, to auto-shape the dog to chew his chew toy, and to reward him for lying down quietly and calmly. When the owner is at home, short-term confinement to a crate, again, to prevent mistakes around the house when the owner's there but maybe not paying 100% of attention. Two, the only thing in the crate is the chew toy stuffed with food, and so again, it is auto-shaping the dog to chew his chew toy and to lie down quietly and calmly so he doesn't become hyperactive, he doesn't run around, and he doesn't realize that his bladder and bowels are full. In terms of house training, the most important aspect of crate training is so that the owner may predict when the puppy is going to pee and poop. That we forget that house training is not just simply a spatial problem, that the dog does it in the wrong place. It's a temporospatial problem. Either the dog's in the wrong place at the right time or the right place at the wrong time. Well, by crating him and then every hour on the hour saying, do you want to go pee and poop, putting him on leash, running to the toilet and standing still, I'm going to bet $100 each time that that puppy will pee within 20 seconds. So the crate is a prediction tool. It allows the owner to predict very accurately within 20, 30 seconds, certainly a minute, that the dog wants to urinate, maybe defecate, so the owner can put it on cue. They can give the cue beforehand. They can take the dog to the appropriate spot. And most importantly, as in any training program, they can reward the dog for doing the right thing in the right place at the right time. I tell owners to give 3 liver treats. Why? If I say, praise your dog like he's done the most wonderful and glorious thing, they say, come on, about damn time, get inside. I mean, people seem to be incapable of praising their dog. They can get very angry when the puppy makes a mistake, so I tell them, take the level of emotion when you're angry. The puppy makes a mistake because you had him out without supervision, and turn that emotion into a pleasant one and give it to the puppy for doing the right thing, right place, at the right time. People can't do this, so I say give 3 liver treats. Why 3? If you say give a liver treat, they don't. But for some reason, if I say give 3 liver treats, I've had people say, honey, do you have a 3rd treat? I've only got 2. Then they actually do it, and the puppy gets the idea. And I can imagine this little puppy going down the garden and chatting to the Akita next door and saying, well, you know, Mr. Akita, my owners, they're amazing, just amazing. Whenever I pee, you know, they give me 3 liver treats. Wow, you know I can cash in my urine and feces for liver treats. Boy, I save it up when I'm left at home alone. I wait for them to come home so we can go to the toilet together and they can get happy and praise me. I would want to say one quick thing about barking. This is the dog trainer's sort of, I say, cognitive domain of situational dimness. I find a lot of dog trainers who are absolutely brilliant trainers, but when it comes to barking, they fall apart and do silly things. To me, it's very simple. Number 1, feed only from chew toys to program the dog to bark less. And you probably see my little bark and activity counter out there for sale. This used to be the size of a computer. I'd put it in dogs' houses, count the number of barks a day, and I'd do that for 3 days. And then I would start feeding the dog out of chew toys, and it would reduce the number of daily barks by 90%. I mean, feeding dogs from chew toys is just amazing. You know, there's no drug on the market that can do that. It's even as effective as most of the bark collars out there. So a simple procedure like that. But in addition, I would put shush on cue. And this is where people don't think about it. It's really so simple. Lure, reward, training. It's as easy as 1, 2, 3, 4. Request, lure, response, reward. So let's put it on cue. Now, the problem is, the best time to train a dog is not when he's amped up and barking at someone at the front door, say. Best time to train a dog is when he's calm. And when he's calm, though, he's not barking. So that's why we put bark on cue first. And we actually teach woof, shush as a 1-2 sequence. The other reason we do it this way is a lot of you, I'm sure, a lot of clicker trainers out there are aware that the last thing you teach your dog, like roll over or woof, he now throws at you all the time. You ask him to heel, he goes heel woof. Then it's sit woof, down woof, come woof, and so on and so on. So we always teach it problem first, woof on cue, and then solution second, shush on cue. How do we teach the dog to woof on cue? Simple. Number one, you say, Rover, speak. Number two, an accomplice rings the doorbell or knocks on the door. Hey, sound effects here. Number three, the dog barks. Number four, you praise the dog. I actually like with some dogs to even bark along with them, because so many dogs get so much abuse for just barking, for just acting like a dog, that I like to go, good dog, woo, 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 good dog, woo, woo. And I've had some dogs look at me like, wow, someone who understands me at last. That's absolutely fantastic. Now the dog's barking, but he's attentive. So number one, we say, Rover, shush. Number two, we waggle a food treat under the dog's nose. And number three, as soon as the dog sniffs the food treat, he stops barking, because you can't sniff and bark at the same time. I defy anyone to try it. And then number four, you whisper praise. Good shush one, good shush two, good shush three. We whisper, because if we whisper, the dog will listen, and if he listens, he won't bark. And we count out the good shush seconds, 1, 2, 3. So now the treat, when we give it to him, will only reward the dog for stopping barking and for being quiet for 3 seconds. It won't reward any barks in the sequence at all. We then repeat the woof shush sequence, each time adding a good shush to the sequence. So second time, be good shush 1, good shush 2, good shush 3, good shush 4. And once we get up to good shush 10, most dogs have got it, because after 10 seconds, very few dogs can remember what they were barking at anyway. Then we need to proof it, go out on a walk every 25 yards, tell the dog to speak and shush. Now the dog understands what shush means, and so we can troubleshoot it in those tricky times when the dog gets upset, like people coming to the front door. Invite 20 people around, tell them all, walk by the house a few times before stepping on the garden path and coming in. We watch the dog. When he barks at people walking by, we say, hey, shush, shush, shush. Yeah, we may have to tell them a few times, but by about the third or fourth time they walk by, you'll get them to be quiet on one shush. When the people step on your garden path, you say, dog, speak, 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 like we're under attack. We want the dogs to bark then. Someone's on our property. And then we say, dog, sit, dog, shush. Again, we may have to tell them a few times. This is the first person's first time coming in. But once they come in and greet the dog, we then tell them to leave through the back door and do the same thing again. And by about the third, fourth, fifth, or sixth time they come into the house, the dog's got it picture perfect. Watch people go by in silence, bark when they step on the property, sit and shush to greet them, and then lead them to the cookie jar and get your payoff. So that's all I'm going to say about behavior problems. So now, training. There are 5 sort of reward-based training techniques we have at our disposal. Auto-shaping, I've mentioned that, stuffing Kongs with food. And that's all I'm going to say about that now. It's a special case. The physical prompting, I wouldn't touch it with a barge pole. My rules in training are you never touch a puppy or dog to get him to do something. However, once he's done it off leash, you can touch him, you can hug him, you can French kiss him if you like as a reward for doing it. But don't touch the dog to get him to do it. Don't tug on the leash. Don't reach for his collar. Don't push on his butt. Otherwise, this physical prompt will become a crutch, which is one of the most difficult ones to phase out. And what you've just done there is change dog training, which is a fairly easy process, into a 2-step process. First, we train him on leash, like, say, a lot of trainers do on the telly. He looks like he's trained, but he ain't. Try cutting that leash and seeing what happens. The dog's in the next state. But he looks like he's under control. But you've still got to train him off leash, and this will take more time and be more difficult because the owner doesn't have any off-leash skills. So I like training off leash from the start. Make it simple, even start in the toilet. Little area, no distractions, very tiny room. Let's get him perfect there. Then the kitchen, then downstairs, then the whole house, then the garden with some people, then the garden with a couple of dogs, then the garden with a bunch of dogs, and then most difficult, the garden with just one other dog. Because if there's only one other dog, of course, you'll be trying to ignore, interrupt your dog, and that's a much bigger distraction. Then we move to other people's gardens and so on. So we're training in safe off-leash areas, increasing the size of the areas and increasing the number of distractions. Looking at it in terms of, I guess, time-wise, lure reward training was the method that came back on the scene in the 70s. A lot of my lectures, and then 82, then we started the off-leash puppy training. Lure reward training is the quickest way to put behaviors on cue. That's the pros. It's so easy for the owner. It's as easy as 1, 2, 3, 4. Number 1, say sit. Number 2, move the food lure. Number 3, the dog sits. Number 4, praise the dog, maybe give the treat. What are the cons, the disadvantages? Some people have difficulty luring, so they have to learn all the luring tips, like start with little dogs on a table or the top of the stairs. So with the down, which is difficult, with little dogs with little legs, you can move the lure below the surface that the dog is standing on. If the dog backs up when you sit, do it in the corner. If he jumps, you're holding your hand too high. So luring is actually very, very simple. It does require a few luring skills. One of the biggest disadvantages, I think, is when people don't do it properly. That in lure reward training, the lure should be phased out within the very first session, within 5 to 10 minutes in the first session. The lure is used simply to teach a willing dog what you want him to do. However, this ain't happening now. I'm seeing people with food in their hand week 6, with food in their pouch week 6. And so now we're bribing the dog. And that's the biggest disadvantage. If you don't understand the lure reward training process, it turns into bribing. And the only difference is the dog willing or not? Well, the pup is willing, so with food in your hand, you can get him to sit and lie down. But this is meant to be an educational process. We're not driving behavior from in front by changing the antecedent. Behavior is changed by the consequences. So when the dog sits, we say, good boy, give him the treat. However, we got to get that food out of our hand, which I generally do in about 12 trials. And then I say, hey, watch this. Puppy come, and with an open hand, sit, down, sit, stand, down, stand. So the food taught the puppy to watch my hand, which has now become a hand signal. So now I don't have to present the food before the behavior. And that's the big danger. If we present the food before the behavior, whether we're wearing a food pouch or we got food in our hand, and the dog is no longer willing, then the process becomes bribing, which of course the dog will blow off when he's about 4.5 months old and develops his other doggy interests. And this is the biggest, I guess, downfall of lure reward training. When it's not done properly, it becomes bribing. And because the owner has seen such great success with their young puppy, and because they ask the puppy to sit, which of course it makes it the quickest way to teach commands on cue, they now want the puppy to sit, and if he doesn't, they get frustrated and sometimes angry. Next along comes shaping, which a lot of people do with clickers. Actually, the very first time that clickers were used training dogs in a workshop was in California here, a seminar that Puppy Works put on for Karen Pryor. She did the talking, Gary Wilkes did the training. And the seminar wasn't going too well. People didn't see the point of training a dog with a little clicker. And so Kathleen asked me to promote it, and I made a whole bunch of phone calls, and we ended up with 200 people. So this is the very first time that clickers were used in training. What are the pros? It brought calmness to training. You see, if you don't ask for the behavior, then you don't expect it, so the dog can't be wrong. This was beautiful. Coming out of a clicker class, it's like you've been a place where everyone was on drugs or something and smoking, and they're calm, they're happy, they've got smiles on their faces, because the dog can't be wrong. You just wait for him to do something and click and give him a treat, and it's fantastic. And the dogs are learning some really neat stuff. Another wonderful pro from clicker training, it took the pain out of training. We now had a workable alternative to teach retrieve. And of course, at the time, even though there were luring techniques, the luring techniques were a little complicated, time-consuming. In this case, clicker training is quicker. But the standard technique then was the ear pinch. You pinched the dog's ear and held the dumbbell in front of his face. And when he bit on the dumbbell, you let go of his ear. Basically, aversive negative reinforcement. The variations on this, they would fold the ear around the metal collar, sometimes around a pinch collar. And a trainer in New Jersey became famous by having an assistant who used 2 pairs of pliers to pinch the dog's ears. The techniques, of course, were just disgusting. I mean, this is not dog training. This is just an advertisement of people who don't know how to train hurting dogs. But it was the method of choice. It was standard training then. Along comes clicker training, and in 25 minutes, you can shape a dog to not just retrieve, but to go and look for a bunch of car keys in a garden in long grass and find it and bring it back to you. 25 minutes is all it takes. So it took a lot of pain out of training. What's the downside of clicker training? It takes a very long time. It requires patience. It requires consistency, consistent observation, consistent feedback, and impeccable timing. This, of course, is not what a lot of dog owners have. So I feel it's too complicated for a lot of beginning owners, but it's certainly too slow. I'd much rather lure, reward, train the dog so within 15 minutes he knows how to come, sit, lie down, stand, roll over, heel, sit, stay, and so on. All done in about 15 minutes and all on cue. So what we have to do with shaping, we first have to capture the behavior, which means we have the dog on continuous reinforcement for a while. There's no need to do that in lure reward training. We start off on a differential reinforcement from trial 2. Next up comes all or none reward training. I credit Sue Sternberg for this. In a seminar, she once said at the ASPCA New York, we don't teach dogs to perform behaviors on cue. At the time, I thought that's a really dumb thing to say, but then she finished her sentence and said, because we don't know the language of the adopting family, and it has less than a 33% chance of being English. I thought, yeah, that's a point. Then she said, instead, we teach dogs to respond to human body language and situations. And my brain just caught fire, and out of this came all or none reward training, which Kelly and I developed for the Untitled program. It's wonderful. Again, there's no expectations. You just look at a crazy dog. It's ideal. It's tailor-made for hyperactive, out of control, inattentive, adolescent dogs. It's actually a shelter behavior and training program. And you look at these crazy dogs and you just smile. And you just think, hey, you silly dog, how could you possibly think that's going to get you a treat? And then all of a sudden, they sit. They're either not sitting or they are. They're looking away from you or they look at you. The behavior comes all at once. It's all or none, so there's no need to shape it. It is a lengthy procedure, though, like shaping, and it does. We have to get or capture the behavior before we can put it on cue. But, man, this is like clicker training. It's calm. It's effortless. It's absolutely, it's wonderful. I used to pull my hair out when I used to work adolescent dogs. I used to hate the classes. Now I love it because you create magic. Within 20 minutes, all these crazy dogs are sitting and looking at their owners, and the only words we've said are good dog. So moving along now, my plan A, plan B, plan C, I would use all of these training techniques. My normal plan A is I'm going to try lure reward training. If it doesn't work because the dog's blowing off the lure, you don't increase the power of the lure. You can't drive behavior from in front by upping the antecedent. No. Instead, we have to have either shape the dog or all or none reward training, and I would opt for the latter because the dog's totally out of control. So I would use all or none reward training techniques to teach the dog to sit, stay, look at me, and to walk on a loose leash. Then I would go back to lure reward training. So plan A, lure reward training, plan B, all or none reward training, and then plan C to really finish off behavior, to fine-tune precision, panache, to teach the dog to look cute, which is most important to get him out of the Humane Society, and to teach the difficult-to-lure behavior. Say you wanted to train a dog to stand on his front paws and to pirouette. We got to shape it. I mean, I just don't know how to lure that at all. I could lure him, down at the front, up at the back, but not to stand on his front legs and pirouette. So shaping is wonderful for the impossible-to-lure behaviors. I would have a dog on a differential reinforcement from the beginning. That when you look at the reinforcement schedules, they're all pretty crazy and kind of meaningless to dog training. Continuous reinforcement, fixed interval, fixed ratio, variable interval, variable ratio. Well, number one, no one could compute variable schedules. It's like, a variable 5, 10 numbers, let me think, let's say 9, 8, 5, 1, 2, 7, 6, 3, 4, 5, add them up, they come to 50, divide by 10, comes to 5. But most people can't compute. I can compute, I just cannot train a dog at the same time. I wouldn't use any of those schedules. They're really silly. They have a lot of problems, scalloping in behavior, the animal goes on strike, all of this stuff. But most importantly, they're dumb because they all reward just as many below average responses as above average responses. So right from the beginning, like if I'm teaching a recall, I'll do a couple of recalls, find the average length, and then I have a simple differential reinforcement formula that to even be considered for a reward, because not being rewarded is a huge learning experience. You tried, but it ain't good enough. It's below average, or it's only slightly above average. So my differential formula is very simple, that in order to be considered for a reward, your performance has to be 10% better than average. So for example, if we're doing a long recall at 50 seconds, then it's got to be less than 45 seconds to even be considered for a good dog. It's got to be 20% above average to be considered for a good dog and 3 treats, and it's got to be 30% above average before it can be considered for a jackpot reward, like woohoo, hot damn diggery, man, chicken skin, salami, cheese, and a big hug and kissy face and everything. So I work out the average, and then I compute these 3 criteria, which would be 45 seconds, 40 seconds, and 35 seconds. And it's very easy now with a stopwatch to look at the dog's performance. I only really want to reward about a third of the responses anyway, the ones which are at least 10% above average. But 20% above average, you get better rewards, and 30% above average, you get the best rewards. Very, very simple. So that's reinforcement. How about punishment? This is the biggie. I think this is where there's been more, I think, cutting-edge innovations in dog training in just the last couple of years. It was so obvious to me when I came to California to join the psychology department that something was funny with learning theory. And I spent the last 3 years working out what's wrong with it. Well, essentially, learning theory is the science, or the theory, the proof, scientific proof of computers training rats in captivity. A dog, I think, is a little different from the rat. He has a few more interests. And of course, we're training dogs not in captivity. They're off leash. They're off leash at home. They're off leash in the park. That punishment works well if the animal is in prison or in captivity because it can't get away from it. But if the animal has the option to get away from it, it will, obviously, especially aversive punishment. They will work to avoid the aversion. Or the animal will convince the owner or the trainer to retreat because aversion is a pretty nasty thing. So the other thing is, who is training the rat in captivity? A computer. And of course, computers are consistent. They consistently observe behavior. They consistently give feedback. And they have impeccable timing. And I think what's happening in dog training now is people are trying to copy this. They're trying to copy not only what computers do, and we simply can't, or at least the owners in our class can't. It's too complicated. They don't have the timing. They don't have the precision. In clicker training, we have a very precise marker, but all too often it's delivered imprecisely. There's no point having a precise marker if the owner or the administrator's training is not so good. So I think we need a much more forgiving techniques. That's where all or none reward training is much more forgiving, because the behavior is all or none. You don't have to mark it. You see, you can look at a dog and ignore him who's jumping up and down, and then he sits. You can actually reward him 4 seconds after the sit. I mean, we're way off. We totally missed the whole action of sitting, but what you just rewarded him for is for sitting for 3 seconds. So it does the same thing. So it's much more forgiving to owners which have crappy timing and are not very attentive. But the whole punishment thing, even when administered correctly by a trainer or a computer that is consistent 100% of the time and has impeccable timing, it just isn't sufficient. It's not what we want to do. Number one, it has to be aversive to work. And I'm certainly not going to do that to my dog. But number two, it's not sufficient. We don't just want to stop the dog from doing stuff. Like a dog that I saw the other day, owned by a trainer. This dog was so inhibited because everything the dog does, he gets punished for. Woof, woof, punishment. Pull on leash, punishment. Jump up, punishment. So the dog just walked next to his own, and there was no pit left in this pit bull. It was so sad. No, what we want to do when we have undesirable behavior is, yes, stop it, but we also want to make sure the dog is on track as quickly as possible. And there's a third thing we may want to do, which is to let the dog know how potentially dangerous non-compliance is. So firstly, say, when Animals forget, dogs forget their household manners. You know, they pee indoors or chew things or bark or what have you. Um, if we give verbal feedback, and this is what has disappeared from dog training, so many people are giving feedback with food treats, clickers and food treats, buzzes, nose, buzzes and shock collars, and so on. Yet we have our voice, and the voice is a wonderful thing because with a single word, we can convey 3 pieces of information. So, for example, 2 pieces of information if the dog's peeing on the carpet, outside, toilet. The dog knows immediately, hey, they want me to stop peeing here and they want me to go to my toilet. The dog's chewing on your brand new shoes, chew toy. 1 word conveys stop chewing here and chew on the chew toy. The dog's about to jump up, sit. Or the dog's running out the front door because your sister came to visit and her son left the front door open. The dog's running for the street and we go, sit! We now convey 3 pieces of information. Number 1, stop running. Number 2, sit. And because of the tone and volume, we let the dog know this is really urgent. This is dangerous. The way we do that, of course, prior training is necessary. It's no good shouting a command at the dog and thinking it's going to work. On the contrary, when the dog's running off, if you scream, come here, you know, or sit, what will happen is the dog will probably say, hey, don't think so. You've got these anger management problems. I'm just going to keep on running away from you. And the dog's in the street and gets killed. So the first time you shout your emergency command, it doesn't work. So we have to first reverse the meaning of tone and volume, done very, very simply. We say to the dog, Rover, sit. Thank you. Then we say, Rover, sit. Good dog. Rover, sit. Good dog, and a liver treat. Rover, sit. Good dog, 3 liver treats. Rover, sit. Good dog, and a piece of cheese. Then Rover, sit. Good dog, piece of cheese, bacon, chicken skin, hugs and kisses and everything. It's so important in an emergency that the dog knows that volume means urgency, or volume means I'm at a great distance from you. That's why you're shouting. We don't want the dog to interpret the volume and tone with its primary interpretation in that the owner is angry. Then what do we do with lack of compliance? What I do is I simply reinstruct the dog. I keep account of the number of times I have to reinstruct, and then I will test him again and again and again. And what I found is something really interesting. We don't have to shout. So we ask the dog to sit, and he doesn't. So I say, Rover, sit, sit, sit. I do one thing first, however. I let the dog know I really mean it now. So we have a neat way to communicate to dogs. I call it the DogCon 3 system. We have 3 names for each dog. So, for example, for Omaha, Om, Omaha, Wahoo. Om means I have a suggestion. If you do it, it's cool. If you don't, that's okay too. So in a sense, I am formalizing my inconsistency. And I let the dog know I'm probably going to be inconsistent now. Hey, what else is new? I'm a human being and I'm lying on the couch drinking a glass of wine. So when I say, Hugo, move over, you know, if he moves, it's good. If he doesn't, that's okay. If on the other hand, I say Omaha, sit, or Hugo Louis, sit, the dog's formal name lets the dog know the next word is a command for you. You must do it. No exceptions. I will follow up. So now I only have to be consistent on those times when I use the dog's formal name. And what I found this last year is you don't have to shout either. See, back in the 80s, I used to say, Rover, sit, 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 sit. I would invoke tone and volume. But now I say, Rover, sit, Rover, sit, sit, sit. Thank you. Now, I had to repeat the command, but the dog eventually did it, so it's not nagging. Well, I had to repeat the command, so I'll tell you what, the dog's got to repeat the whole exercise. So once he eventually sits, I write down how many commands it took, say 11, and I say, thank you, which means minimal requirements have been met. You're sitting. Then I take 2 steps backwards. I call the dog, Rover, come, Rover, sit. And the dog now, of course, because he eventually sat, he's now being compliant. He demonstrated his compliance by eventually sitting. He will now come on the first command, sit on the first command. So I go, woohoo, hot damn diggery, go play. And what I found is walking the dogs off leash, they learn this very, very quickly. No prior training whatsoever, apart from knowing what the word sit means. We just come up with a new command prefix or name for the dog, Hugo Louis. And now every time we say Hugo Louis sit or Hugo Louis come, we now enforce it, but without any force whatsoever. We just calmly insist. So many people are like scared of doing this. Like, what do you repeat the command? I say, yeah. I mean, what would you do if your dog's running towards the cliff? Rover, sit. Oh, damn. And of course, you repeat the command in the training process or in danger. The finished performances, though, with the way I train and what everyone else wants is I give a single, softly spoken command, and my dog does it. All I can say is my dogs walk off leash. So it works for me. I very much hope it works for you. Well, that's exactly my 45 minutes. So I think now we have a question time. So I will slow down and listen to your questions.
Awesome. Okay. Um, I've got Dr. Dunbar's website up on the screen for those who want to learn more. I've also got some books, and those are available on dogstardaily.com. Before
I'm
we
so
get
glad you're doing the tech stuff, Brooke, because if I tried it, it would all go so wrong.
well, I'm doing my best here.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Before we get to the questions, we're going to do our quick Merrick Pet Food giveaway. So I have actually a question for the audience. So everybody get ready. And the first person to answer this correctly is going to win a 25-pound bag of Merrick's new grain-free real Texas beef dog food. And then Merrick is also going to donate a bag of the same food in your name to the National Mill Dog Rescue. So the question is, when is the best time to train a dog?
Me.
Let's see. I should rephrase that. Oh, we got it. K Rish says when he's calm. Kay, you're the winner. Contact us on Facebook or email me at brooke@dogingtonpost.com with your address, and we'll get that voucher out to you. Okay, so
I have another answer to that one. I would have said as early as possible, meaning as early as possible in his life, not as early as possible in the day, because I'm a morning person.
We did have as a puppy, where that was a lot of answers too, but when they are calm was what I pulled from your talk. So
good.
Okay, so questions are I saw this a lot while you were talking. A lot of people were asking if they have old rescue dogs that they don't know what happened to them when they were puppies. What's a good way to socialize them now?
Well, it all depends on whether or not the dog has bite inhibition. And this, of course, is often the great unknown. And so the way we socialize dogs is very, very carefully till we get a feel for it. It's why I tell people at shelters when someone surrenders a dog, don't let them go. I mean, talk to them, because they know things like this dog has been nipping their child. And if I can get that information that the dog has, say, nipped at the child 10 times, I think brilliant. You know, the dog doesn't like children. We can change that very quickly with some classical conditioning, but we know the dog's got bite inhibition. Same thing with dog-dog aggression. The more fights they've had without sending a victim to the veterinary clinic, the better the dog's bite inhibition. So it's really, you know, we don't know. We get ideas from watching dogs play. So if dogs play, one would assume they have bite inhibition with each other. And I can talk from personal experience. The last dog we adopted was Zuzu, and we got her at 10 months of age. And I said to Kelly, number one, I said, Kelly, this is crazy. Why do we want a fourth dog? And why are we getting a 10-month-old outdoors dog? It's not going to be house trained. It will be difficult to house train. We know it was a fence jumper. The dog can take a 6-foot fence from a standing leap. It's a deer chaser, da-da-da-da-da. And she's, yes, I know, but the dog hasn't got a home. And I said, well, here's the deal breaker. If the dog is not mouthing me, I don't want it. I want to see it mouthing people. So we go up and met it at a dog park. We saw it's totally friendly with dogs, playing, mouthing them. It's got good bite inhibition there. I can see that. And then I take the dog on leash, and I sort of disappeared while Kelly talked to the owners, and Zuzu started mouthing me with a vengeance. So I came back and told her, I said, she's biting me, and she smiled. Good, we can take her. So that's a really good sign, because if the dog is still mouthing you, we can teach it bite inhibition like a puppy. As an adolescent, it may hurt a little more, but we can still teach it. So that's the only thing I would be concerned about. Everything else, you know, we can teach pretty easy. But if the dog doesn't have bite inhibition, especially towards other dogs and other animals. There just ain't no way to teach it. There isn't. It's the unsolvable dog training problem. If anyone knows of a technique, please let me know, because it's I just can't think of a way.
Okay, we have a question from Andrea. She says, a trainer told me not to keep repeating a command more than 2 times and wait for the dog to perform. You say to say the command over and over again. Can you explain that?
Yeah, this mantra, don't repeat the command. I mean, everyone says it, and you think, why? Well, a learning theorist will say you're denaturing the stimulus. Well, I prove you're not. I could give you a command. Say I said, lete pombe, pesi pesi. And I say it over and over, lete pombe, lete pombe, lete pombe. Now I'm going to teach you what it means, and you're all going to learn at the same speed, whether you know what this means or not. It means fetch me a beer, quickly, quickly. And now you know it. So repeating, you see, you can't make an irrelevant stimulus more irrelevant. And the word sit is irrelevant to the dog. He doesn't know what it means, as evidenced by his non-compliance. The traditional dog training world, of course, they have this mantra, don't repeat the command. Let me give you an example. Kelly and I were driving to Tango one night, and it's dusk, and I realized she has not seen this person about to step off in the crosswalk. And so I said, Kelly, stop. And she was not paying attention at all. So what do? Keep quiet? No. I went, Kelly, stop, 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 stop. And I repeated it 4 times. Of course you repeat the command if it's dangerous, and of course you repeat the command in a learning context. Now, it would take me about 20 minutes to explain why, well, let's put it this way. If you give a dog a repetitive sequence, so verbal commands only, sit down, sit, stand down, stand, when you're standing right in front of it, and then you work out the response reliability, which is number of responses divided by number of commands you had to give times 100. Say your percentage reliability with a dog sitting from the stand is 92%. Now take a step back, do it again. Then another step back, do it again. What you will find is every step back you take, you get a reduction in response reliability, and eventually it drops to 0. So when your dog's off leash at a distance and you say, Rover, sit, you get 0 compliance because he just doesn't know what it means. But the closer you get to him, that's where the relevancy comes in, because that's where you've trained. Most people have only trained their dogs when they're sitting in front or at their side. So we have a learning to learn routine that they don't know it from 3 yards away, but they know it better from 2 yards away. So they learn that when you're 3 yards away, next you're going to step up, and I know that a little better until eventually they're really close. So when we run the numbers, we find the more we do it, the more the dog is learning, until eventually the dog always sits following a single command, and then he gets to go play. And I tell people, try it out. It works. But the resistance I have to this is unbelievable, and people don't try it. And so what I say to them is, hey, let's go for a dog walk. My dogs are off leash. What about yours? No, theirs are on leash. Why? Because they don't have off leash reliability. I do. And it's the one thing in training for 30 years I've really been interested in. I like panache and precision, but, it really isn't my thing. I want my dog to sit. Why? Then I can control the environment. If the environment gets weird, I can say, Rover, sit. The dog does it. I can either release the dog, go play, the reward's out there. I can have the dog look at my hand so he doesn't look at the other dog and amp him up. Or I can call the dog to me, and the recall will be reliable because he just showed compliance by sitting. Or if, say, school children are running up or someone on horseback, I run up to the dog and put him on leash. So all I can say is it works, and this is what I demonstrate in my workshops. It's a very, very useful technique, and the dogs learn it surprisingly quickly. I mean, they'll learn it in one walk, one off-leash walk. And now you've got a dog that sits at a distance when off-leash, and this to me is a much safer dog.
Okay, we have a question from Mimi. She says, I'd like some tips about self-control training. My teenage pit mix has a very hard time controlling himself. When we're training, he just wants rewards and does all the tricks he's ever learned. My dog does the same thing. She just wants him to chill a bit and focus.
Yeah, I mean, this is largely a product of, whereas the dog's being trained in a happy way, we don't have the dog on a differential reinforcement, and we're just rewarding everything the dog does. So, like in my workshops, I say, ask your dog to sit. This happened just this weekend in wherever I was, Texas, and God, how quickly I forget. I was only there a few days ago. Anyway, so the gentleman asked his Sheltie to sit, and instead it laid down. So I said, well, if you ask a dog to sit and he lies down, what do we know? Well, people get the first bit. He doesn't really know what sit means. And I say, yeah, but he doesn't know what down means either, does he? If he thinks down could be a substitute for sit. So when you train my way, I train by the numbers, and we're talking about response reliability, and I'm so ruthlessly, objectively, quantitative. I'm always assessing the dog's understanding of the behavior, and the reason is, let me give you another example. So face your dog, have him sit. Then have someone hold him on leash, turn your back on the dog, and tell him sit again. And your friend is going to say, good dog, if your dog sits. Well, most dogs don't. So repeat it 5 times. Rover, sit. Rover, sit. Rover, sit. He doesn't sit, but everyone laughs because he's looking at your butt and cocking his head from side to side, like as if he's saying, oh my God, it spoke. It's never spoken to me before. Then turn round and ask the dog to sit once. He does it. So I can prove now this is not a disobedient dog because he sat when you faced him and said sit just once. But he didn't sit when your back was turned. So I would maintain, as the dog's defense counsel, I think he just doesn't understand what sit means when your back was turned. So now I add relevance. Well, look, if you turn your back and you're just 1 yard away and the dog doesn't sit, what makes you think the dog would sit when he turns his back and he's 40 yards away chasing a rabbit? But that's the situation, you see, where owners would then say, we got to get a shock collar on this dog. No, I can show you in the workshop or in your own bathroom that your dog doesn't know what sit means if I just turn your back or make you lie on the ground or do silly things. And so we have to be really, when we ask dogs to do things, we have to ask the question, has he met criterion? And what I find is, say in clicker classes, people are really rigorous about setting criteria for shaping, but then they aren't as rigid when it comes to the dog's behavior repertoire. So if I'd asked the dog to sit and he went sort of jump up, circle, circle, woof, woof, back up, roll over, and then sat, I would just wait for the dog to sit before I would reward him. The other stuff most definitely wouldn't be rewarded. And even then, if he sat, he wouldn't necessarily get a reward. It's very, very ironic for me to say this, that since I was the person who reintroduced dog food into training in like the early 70s and then 82 in, the puppy classes, introducing food as lures and rewards for classical conditioning, for temperament training, behavior training, and obedience training. If you ask me, what's the biggest problem in dog training at the moment, or what's the biggest problem in dog-friendly dog training, I would say people are using too much food, and they aren't phasing it out. And so the dog's behavior becomes contingent on them having food in their hand or in their food pouch. And this is the first thing we phase out in serious puppy classes. Week 1, I tell everybody, right, put your food in your pocket with an empty hand, step back, and you go sit down, sit, stand down, stand, hand signals only. Week 2, now you do hand signals only, sit down, sit, stand down, stand, but now stand still, no movement, no hand signal, verbal commands only. Sit down, sit, stand down, stand. We've got to test that we have verbal reliability. Why? It's the only way we can communicate to a dog when his back's turned. So, on the one hand, I would say, hey, this is a happy working dog. He's telling you all the things you've taught me I love. Thank you, owner. This is fun. This is fun. I would say, yeah, it's fun, but let's teach the dog to do the behaviors when you ask for them and not just have the dog throw them at you willy-nilly.
Okay. And Beth is asking, and I think this will be our last question. She's saying, my dog will obey commands if I say them in a happy voice, but if they're said in a more serious tone, he won't listen. Why is that?
It's because control has become volume and tone dependent. And you see, for men, the opposite is true. They will say, oh, my dog doesn't listen to me when I have a normal voice. I say, Rover, sit, Rover, down. That one very important thing in training is that the dog understands the meaning of the word irrelevant of tone and volume. I use tone and volume to communicate other things. So I already gave you the example and actually the answer to the question. How do we teach the dog that when we shout, we're not angry? We just want to let the dog know it's really important. He follows instructions now immediately and to the letter. So we start in a happy voice and we say, Rover, sit. But for the reward, which drives the behavior, we say, thank you. Then we go, Rover, sit. And we say, good dog. And then we say, Rover, sit, neutral voice. So we're getting rid of the positive tone. It's now neutral tone. We're going to change it into ugly tone with volume. But as we do that, the value of the reward increases. So we have a whole spectrum of rewards. So now in a neutral tone, Rover, sit, good dog, bit of kibble. Then Rover, sit, good dog, 2 bits of kibble. Rover, sit, good dog, 3 bits of kibble. Then Rover, sit. Now we bring in treats, freeze-dried liver and salami. Then Rover, sit, and barbecued lamb. And it's a very quick process for the dog to learn, and it's an absolute essential one. There's times when you're not happy. I remember a time when I went into the TV room and my dogs were all wriggly. They were watching CNN, and I looked on the screen and something terrible had happened. It was the first war in Iraq, and I have nieces and nephews in the military, and I was so deflated. I thought, oh no, and my dogs are all wriggly. I said, dogs, settle. I couldn't get any affect in my voice at all, but the dogs know what the word dogs mean. That is the group of dogs formal name, and it means all dogs do it instantly. It's a very useful way to communicate with people too, and what it says is, look, I can't explain now. I'm too upset. I don't have the energy for it, or it's too dangerous. Just do it. I'll explain it all later. But if you do it, I am going to pet you really lovingly and gently, because that example was a time where, I got a lot of relief from having dogs to pet when watching the madness on the TV. So reverse the meaning of tone and volume, and we're off and running.
Great. Well, that puts us right at 60 minutes. So, Dr. Dunbar, thank you so much for your time. Again, if anyone has any more questions or wants information, go to dogstardaily.com, and everybody send us a message and let us know what you thought. Everybody's saying thank you, thank you.
Well, tell everyone thank you from Ian, and I had a good time. Sorry I spoke so quickly. I don't know what happens when I'm doing webinars, but I'm kind of like a machine gun going off. But now I'm going to relax and go and pick up Jamie, and the two of us are going up to the ski cabin, and we are skiing for 2 days.
Wonderful.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
And thank you, Brooke, for inviting me on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for coming. Take care.
Bye-bye.